Hey everyone, welcome to Mythology Explained. Since Christopher Nolan's Odyssey trailer dropped a couple of weeks ago, the discussion around the film has only gotten louder, in a lot of different ways. This is one of the most famous stories in the ancient world, being adapted by one of the biggest directors alive. So naturally people are going to pick apart every frame, every costume, every casting choice, and every creative decision. And one of the biggest talking points now is no longer just rumour or speculation. Lupita Nyong'o has been confirmed as Helen of Troy, and apparently also Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon and sister of Helen herself. In Greek mythology, Clytemnestra is one of the most infamous and tragic figures in the entire Trojan War cycle. Spoiler coming here, do I need to do that for stories from 700 BCE? Ultimately murdering Agamemnon after his return from Troy in revenge for the sacrifice of their daughter Iphigenia. So today I want to dig into that a little bit more. Not in the lazy, everything must look exactly how I personally imagined it sense, but in the broader question of adaptation, mythology, and what it actually means for a Greek myth to still feel Greek. Starting with the source material. When people talk about what characters in the Odyssey or the Iliad are supposed to look like, they're often relying on later interpretations rather than the original text. Homer generally doesn't give us modern-style character descriptions. He's more interested in status, lineage, reputation, and repeated epithets than precise facial features. Helen is a useful example of that. In the Iliad, Helen is treated as extraordinarily important, the symbolic cause of the Trojan War. The woman whose abduction or elopement sets this entire catastrophe in motion. But Homer doesn't sit there giving us a detailed physical breakdown of her appearance. Her role matters more than the color of her hair or the exact shade of her skin. So when people say Helen has to look one very specific way, that image often comes less from Homer himself and more from centuries of later Greek art, European painting, literature, and popular imagination layered on top of the original myth. But at the same time, there is another side to this. Because while Greek mythology is flexible, it isn't completely rootless. The Odyssey is usually tied to a Bronze Age Greek world, or at least a later poetic memory of one. And that does matter when you're building the visual identity of the film. The trailer already gives us our first real sense of Nolan's approach. It looks huge, physical, grounded, and very much interested in making the myth feel like something that happened in a real, brutal, ancient world. And because of that, questions about costumes, armor, geography, casting, and cultural texture are going to be part of the conversation whether people like it or not. That's where the Helen casting becomes more interesting. Lupita Nyong'o is obviously a brilliant actress, and Helen being the most beautiful woman in the world is not something that can be reduced to one rigid modern look. But Helen is also not just any character. She is one of the most symbolically loaded figures in Greek mythology. She represents beauty, desire, destruction, blame, power, and the entire human cost of the Trojan War. So I don't think the question is simply, does she match one painting I saw once? That's too shallow. The better question is whether Nolan's version of Helen will feel organically connected to the world the film is creating, or whether it will feel like a modern casting choice sitting awkwardly inside an ancient Greek story. Based on what I've seen of casting so far, I'm leaning towards the latter. Mythology has always been retold. The ancient Greeks themselves constantly reshaped these stories. There's no single fixed cinematic universe version of the myths. Different poets, regions, playwrights, and artists emphasized different things. But even with that flexibility, these myths still come from somewhere. They're tied to language, place, culture, ritual, geography, and historical memory. And once you move too far away from that, the story can start to feel less like an adaptation of Greek myth and more like a modern fantasy film using Greek names. And that's really where I tend to land on this. I'm not against reinterpretation. In fact, reinterpretation is basically the entire history of mythology. But I do think there's something important about a Greek myth still feeling Greek, not in a narrow, obsessive museum piece way, but in a way that preserves the cultural weight and atmosphere of the world that produced it. So now that the trailer is out, and now that the casting is confirmed, I think the real challenge for Nolan isn't whether every detail aligns perfectly with ancient sources, but whether the world of the film still feels recognizably Greek at its core. I guess time will tell. That's it for today's video. Make sure to like the video for more future content. See you in the next one.